If you are a senior citizen or if you're someone caring for an aging parent, then what I'm about to share with you could change the way you look at food. I know how easy it is to get stuck in old habits, grabbing the same breakfast every morning, heating up whatever's quick for lunch, or skipping vegetables at dinner because honestly they don't taste that great. But here's something worth paying attention to. A simple, familiar food that you can find in any grocery store in America. A food that's not only tasty but powerful enough to fight off some of the most common health challenges seniors face. That food is the sweet potato. It's cheap, it's comforting, and most importantly, if you prepare it the right way, it can protect your vision, strengthen your heart, improve digestion, even boost your energy in ways that pills and supplements often can't. So before you walk past it again in the produce aisle, stay with me until the end. You might just discover that one small change can add not only years to your life, but quality to those years. Let me introduce you to George Thompson. George is 72 years old and has been retired for nearly a decade. He lives in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio, in a modest single-story house with a small front porch where he likes to sit every morning with his cup of black coffee. He still wears his favorite red flannel shirt and a weathered Cleveland Indians baseball cap, the kind of outfit that tells you he's a man who doesn't care much for trends. George is the type of neighbor everyone waves to but doesn't know too well, the kind of man who keeps to himself, fixes his own lawn mower, and makes sure the flag outside his house is raised every morning. Despite his strong frame, George has one stubborn habit: he avoids vegetables at all costs. He jokes about it often, saying things like, "I only eat vegetables by accident, like when they sneak onto my cheeseburger." His friends laugh, but behind the humor is a truth most seniors share. Vegetables are often the first thing to disappear from the plate as the years go by. And for George, that choice has started to catch up with him, though he doesn't yet realize how much. George may joke about avoiding vegetables, but his body has been giving him quiet warnings. Lately, his eyesight isn't as sharp as it used to be, street signs seem blurrier, and reading the newspaper requires brighter light than before. He often feels bloated after dinner, complaining that nothing seems to sit quite right in his stomach. His energy fades quickly, so much so that he sometimes skips his evening walks because, as he puts it, the couch just wins. And though he doesn't admit it out loud, climbing the stairs at his daughter's house leaves him more winded than it should. These are the kinds of struggles many seniors face, the subtle signs that health is slipping in ways easy to ignore until it's too late. For George, the habit of pushing vegetables aside has quietly piled up into real problems, and it's only a matter of time before he realizes something needs to change. One chilly November morning, George went in for his regular checkup at the local clinic. He thought it would be routine blood pressure, a few quick questions, and then out the door. But this time, his doctor leaned back in the chair, tapped the chart with his pen, and said, "George, your cholesterol is climbing and your blood sugar is creeping higher than I'd like. If we don't make some changes now, you're headed straight toward type 2 diabetes and heart trouble." The words landed heavier than George expected. He'd always considered himself tough, a man who could handle anything, but sitting there in that paper gown, he felt smaller than usual. The thought of more pills, more restrictions, maybe even losing the freedom to enjoy his daily routines, it rattled him. On the drive home, with the radio barely turned up and the cold Ohio wind shaking his truck, George realized for the first time that his old habits weren't just stubborn quirks anymore. They were risks, and the clock was ticking. A few days after that appointment, George stopped by the grocery store on his way home from the hardware shop. He wasn't looking for anything special, just bread, milk, and a box of cereal. But as he pushed the cart past the produce section, his eyes landed on a display of sweet potatoes piled high in a wooden crate, their orange skins glowing under the fluorescent lights. He remembered something his neighbor had mentioned at a block party: sweet potatoes are good for just about everything: heart, eyes, even your energy. At the time, George had laughed it off, but now the doctor's warning echoed in his ears. He picked one up, turned it over in his hand, and muttered to himself, "Better than another pill, I guess." It felt strange, almost like admitting defeat, but there was also a flicker of curiosity. Could something as ordinary as a sweet potato really make a difference? For a man who had spent years pushing vegetables aside, this small act of dropping a few into his cart was the first step toward something unexpected. That evening, George sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and pulled out his tablet. He typed "sweet potato health benefits" into the search bar, half expecting the usual internet nonsense. Instead, what popped up surprised him. Every article, every health site seemed to be saying the same thing: sweet potatoes weren't just a tasty side dish, they were packed with nutrients that could target the very problems his doctor had warned him about. He leaned closer, scrolling through the list. First, vision: vitamin A and beta-carotene could protect eyesight and lower the risk of cataracts. George thought about how he'd squinted at the newspaper that morning and nodded. Second, immunity, antioxidants strong enough to keep colds and flu at bay. That would be nice, he thought. He hated being sidelined in winter. Third, digestion, fiber that helped with constipation and bloating, two things he rarely admitted but often suffered through. Fourth, brain health, a nutrient called choline that supported memory and lowered the risk of dementia. That one made him pause. His father had slipped into Alzheimer's and the memory still haunted him. He kept scrolling. Fifth, heart health, reduced inflammation, lower risk of heart attack and stroke. He rubbed his chest unconsciously. Sixth, blood sugar, a low glycemic index, meaning they wouldn't spike his levels like white bread or soda. Seventh, skin antioxidants that slowed wrinkles and age spots. George chuckled, guess it's too late for me there. Eighth, hair prevention against premature graying and hair loss. He tugged at his thinning gray hair and laughed again, now they're just making stuff up. But the list went on. Ninth, bones, stronger density, prevention against fractures. He remembered stumbling on the porch steps last month and shivered at the thought of a broken hip. 10th, weight control, fiber that kept you full longer. That sounded promising, maybe fewer late-night chips. 11th, energy complex, carbs for lasting stamina. He thought about his abandoned evening walks. And finally, 12th, libido, better circulation and vitality. George blinked, then laughed out loud. Well, now they've really got my attention. For the first time, George didn't see vegetables as rabbit food. He saw them as a quiet arsenal, a natural medicine cabinet sitting right there in the produce aisle. Still, a part of him remained skeptical. Could something this simple really deliver on so many fronts? He didn't know yet, but curiosity was beginning to outweigh doubt. The next week, George decided to give it a fair try. He baked a couple of sweet potatoes in the oven, wrapped in foil, not expecting much. When he sliced one open, steam rose and the orange flesh glowed against the kitchen light. He added a small pat of butter and a sprinkle of cinnamon, took a bite, and paused. It was sweeter than he expected, rich and comforting, not at all like the bland vegetables he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. By the third night, he'd swapped his usual bag of potato chips for roasted wedges he jokingly called senior fries. At first, he didn't think much had changed, but after a few weeks he noticed he wasn't as bloated after dinner. His morning walks felt easier, his energy lasted longer through the day, and even his sleep seemed deeper. One evening, after climbing the stairs at his daughter's house without gasping for air, George stopped at the top, surprised. He whispered to himself, maybe those articles weren't full of it after all. For the first time in years, he felt like his body was working with him instead of against him, and the realization sparked something he hadn't felt in a while, hope. One Saturday evening, George's daughter invited him over for dinner. Usually he showed up with a store-bought pie or a pack of dinner rolls, but this time he carried a tray of roasted sweet potato wedges, sprinkled with cinnamon and just a touch of sea salt. His daughter raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Dad, since when do you bring vegetables?" George just grinned and set the tray on the counter. When the meal began, his youngest granddaughter, Emily, reached for one of the wedges. She bit into it, her eyes widened, and she exclaimed, "Grandpa, these are magic fries." The whole table laughed, and George felt a quiet pride he hadn't expected. Soon, everyone was reaching for seconds, even his teenage grandson, who usually turned his nose up at anything orange or green. Watching his family enjoy a dish he once would have avoided gave George more satisfaction than he cared to admit. For the first time in years, he wasn't just sitting at the table, he was contributing something that made people smile. And in that moment, the sweet potato stopped being just food. It became a bridge between his health and his family's happiness. After that family dinner, George grew more curious about different ways to cook sweet potatoes. He learned quickly that boiling them, the way his mother used to, drained out much of the nutrition. So instead, he experimented. Sometimes he roasted thick wedges tossed with olive oil, cinnamon, and a little black pepper. Other times, he sliced them thin and crisped them in the oven until they looked like chips, a healthier replacement for the greasy bag he used to keep by his recliner. On Sundays, he even tried steaming them lightly to add to his daughter's chicken stew. Each method kept the rich flavor intact while preserving the vitamins his doctor insisted he needed. George laughed as he plated a fresh batch one evening and said, "Who knew I'd end up being the guy with recipes?" Cooking had never been his hobby, but discovering simple, tasty ways to prepare this vegetable gave him a new sense of control. It didn't feel like a diet or a restriction anymore, it felt like a choice, one he could stick with. A few weeks later, George was asked to bring a dish to his church's monthly potluck dinner. In the past, he would have shown up with a box of store-bought cookies, something quick and forgettable. But this time he decided to bring a big tray of his roasted sweet potato wedges. As he set the dish down among casseroles and pies, a couple of old friends teased him, "George, you finally turned into a health nut." He just smirked and said, "Try one before you judge." Before long, the tray was empty. People kept coming back, asking what he'd put on them, surprised that something so simple could taste that good. One of the church ladies leaned over and whispered, "You should share the recipe in the newsletter." George chuckled, shaking his head, but deep down he felt a swell of pride. It wasn't just about his health anymore. It was about being part of something bigger, showing others that small changes could matter. For a man who once mocked vegetables, becoming the guy everyone asked for cooking tips was both ironic and deeply satisfying. That night after the potluck, George sat on his porch with a blanket over his knees and thought about how far he had come. Just a few months earlier, vegetables were the punchline of his jokes, and now they were the reason his energy felt steadier, his walks were easier, and his family looked at him with pride. He remembered climbing the stairs at his daughter's house without losing his breath, and how his granddaughter had called them magic fries. Those little moments mattered more than any lab result. Smiling to himself, he whispered, "Funny how one small change can make you feel 10 years younger." For George, the sweet potato had become more than food. It was proof that it's never too late to start taking care of yourself. And for anyone listening to his story, the message was clear. Don't wait for a doctor's warning to make a change. Try something simple, share it with your family, and see how far it takes you. Life is too precious not to give yourself the chance to live it fully.